Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. This series is designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. To keep up with all things digital, please subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. And now, Jennifer Ziegel, a partner at Kleinbart LLC, Ross Bruck, a principal of Estate Genie, and Justin Brown, a partner at Pepper Hamilton LLP, with today's topic.
Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. I'm your host, Ross, joined by my co-hosts, Jen and Justin. Today will be the first of a three-part series on blockchain. Today we'll be exploring the basics of a public blockchain network. In parts 2 and 3 of our series, we'll dive deeper into the blockchain technology through an interview of a notable expert in the industry. Jen, our resident expert on blockchain, will be helping us understand the basics.
Well, thank you very much, Ross. I would definitely not classify myself as an expert on blockchain, but I am extremely interested and fascinated by the technology. So, what is a public blockchain? Today we're going to be talking about this concept at a very, very high level. We're not going to get into some of the underpinning technological schematics of blockchain technology, and we want to just give our listeners a very conceptualized view of blockchain. So at its core, it can be defined as a digital database containing information and records that are simultaneously used and shared within a larger, decentralized, and publicly accessible network without the need for any type of central authority or control. It can also be thought of as a giant ledger or accounting system. Information is added to the block, verified, and then uploaded to form a chronological chain of informational blocks that in theory are not subject to manipulation, as data in a block cannot be retroactively changed once it's uploaded to the actual blockchain network. Information in the blockchain can never be deleted, and it creates a permanent, immutable ledger. Companies, financial institutions, governments, VC firms around the globe have been investing millions and millions of dollars into this technology over the last several years. Ultimately, I feel it has the capability to hugely disrupt many aspects of our lives at almost every level. However, blockchain is not magic, and there are problems to overcome before there can be mass adoption. But practitioners, advisors, and business owners need to be aware of the capability, future uses, and wide impacts that this technology will have over many different fields.
Jen, how did blockchain technology evolve?
So, the creator of blockchain is a person or a group or a female or a male that goes by the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. And Satoshi Nakamoto published back in October of 2008 a white paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Now, this white paper was released at a time in 2008 when the financial system had just collapsed and was in ruins. And Bitcoin was an answer to the mounting distrust in governments and financial institutions. A public blockchain eliminates many of the flaws of traditional banking systems. The Bitcoin blockchain network was not the first distributed ledger technology. There were previous iterations of this technology by different tech groups. However, the Bitcoin blockchain network in 2008, when the white paper emerged, was the most advanced distributed ledger technology and solved some of the flaws in previous iterations.
That's a public blockchain. What's a private blockchain then?
Yes, and I think in the future we could have episodes just dedicated to exploring some of the nuances between public and private blockchains. But essentially, a public blockchain, anybody can participate if they have the right technological, computer, and hardware equipment. It's permissionless. You don't need or require any third party to grant access to a user. Whereas a private blockchain network is different. It's a permissions network, and it can be created by a group of financial institutions or it be held individually by a company. And in a private blockchain network, you can control the rules of the code, whereas in a public blockchain network, the rules of the code are built into the architecture of the network. So changing the codes or changing certain technological protocols requires getting mass consensus, which we're not going to dive into too deeply today. There are a lot of different divisions within the blockchain community on, the uses of public and private blockchains. Now, public blockchains incorporate the spirit behind the underlying technology, and traditionalists think that all blockchains should be public to carry out the spirit and intent of a distributed ledger. But there can be flaws in that type of thinking because private blockchains do serve a lot of purposes, especially with companies or groups that want to do business with each other in a more limited environment.
Can you explain what a distributed ledger is?
Absolutely. So in a public blockchain, it's essentially an open distributed database that can record transactions between two parties in an efficient, permanent, and verifiable manner. Everyone who participates in the network has a copy of the ledger, which prohibits conflicts, tampering, hacking, ideally, and duplicative transactions. Now, each public blockchain network can have their own rules that specify how changes to the architecture of the code can be made, and if an individual or bad actor attempts to not follow the coding protocol of that network and tries to manipulate or change data that's already in the blockchain ledger, it's going to be ignored just from a technological basis by other operators. So a public blockchain network are composed and supported by thousands of computers that are maintained by individual operators across the globe. I mean, these really are borderless networks. And the computers in the network maintain the blockchain. They're called nodes. And miners are the operators who are actually placing transactions in the block and then uploading that to the chain. Now, miners can be nodes and nodes can be miners, and that can get we can get into the weeds on some of the technical terms there, but in general, that's the scope of what a distributed ledger is.
So Jen, you talked a lot about the format and the structure of blockchain on the public ledger and the private, but how does an individual access a blockchain? How do they identify themselves to those thousands of computers where the blockchain is contained on the ledger, and how do they transact with it?
It's a great question. So the underpinnings of blockchain technology relies on cryptography. And each participant in the network is identified by a public and then matching private key. So public keys are viewable on the chain, very similar in concept to a public phone number in a directory. But the phone can only be answered and messages accessed by the owner of the phone. That's equivalent to the private key. Public and private keys are essentially alphanumeric codes. A public key is often referred to as an address, which is tagged to the owner's data and information. And the private key is the numeric code that's associated with proving ownership of that address. Private keys can also be interpreted as an equivalent to a digital signature of an owner. One of the hurdles for mass adoption is storage of private keys. So if a private key is lost or stolen, it's not discoverable, it's not retrievable. It's equivalent to losing $100 in cash on the street. It's gone, which adds complexity to crypto estate planning and other digital asset planning that's utilizing this underlying technology, which we're going to dive into in much further depth in future episodes. Another way to think about it is a public key encryption can only be decrypted with a matching private key. Right now, there are over 1,500 cryptocurrencies in existence running on various blockchains around the world. And many of these coins have fraudulent operators without any true substance, but others can serve many different purposes beyond just a form of digital currency.
Jen, can you talk a little bit about Bitcoin networks? What are Bitcoin networks?
Sure. So the Bitcoin network, and that's Bitcoin with a capital B, the Bitcoin currency is Bitcoin with a lowercase b, is a decentralized public network. It's one of the first predominant blockchain networks. And in a Bitcoin network, there is a historic size limit of 1 megabyte per block. And so what happens is information is added, to a block, and once it reaches the size limit, then there are verification procedures with miners, and essentially the miners are incentivized to maintain the network, and they verify and publish transactions that are put on a block and then uploaded to the chain by being the first to solve a cryptographic puzzle. Whichever miner solves this puzzle first is then rewarded with a small amount of Bitcoin as fees to the miner for supporting the network. And what's interesting about this technology is the answer to the mathematical problem solved also forms the basis for the next puzzle to be able to add the next block to the chain. Now, the size limit of Bitcoin is controversial in the blockchain community because the size of the block affects how fast transactions can be processed, which currently results in scalability issues. A smaller size limit, results in delays in processing times and the amount of transactions that can occur each day.
So taking a step back, solving for the next answer, solving for the next equation is you're building onto the last one, right?
Right.
So that means it gets harder and harder as time goes on because you're going to continue mining, but the next miner faces a more difficult task than the last one.
Absolutely.
Which then requires greater computing power, which requires greater energy. It gets harder and harder to build towards the later answers than it does the earlier one.
Absolutely. And what's also interesting about the Bitcoin network is that it's hard-coded so that only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be in existence. There'll never be more than that. There'll never be less than that once all of the Bitcoins have been created. So the Bitcoin network can be used in several ways. So it can be a store of value for the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. It can be used as a method of payment. And it can also be a transfer of value. Other blockchain networks, can serve similar purposes and also have other utilitarian functions that go beyond the capabilities of the Bitcoin blockchain network.
So Jen, if it's getting more costly and more inefficient as we continue to mine for additional Bitcoin, does that lead to some miners deciding not to continue to pursue additional mining?
Definitely. So the Bitcoin blockchain, in terms of cryptocurrency value, is extremely volatile. I mean, we've seen massive swings in prices. In 2017 in December, Bitcoin hit its top price of a little over 20,000, and then in 2018, it's known as crypto winter when the value of Bitcoin, at one point dropped below $4,000. So beginning in 2019 in the winter and then continuing on through the spring, we've seen a rise in the price of Bitcoin and that it's beginning to take a bull run on the market. But it's very interesting to note that because of the cost of the mining equipment and the technological advances that are being made on a daily basis and advances to that equipment, which can be costly, and the energetic use of continuing to have those that software in operation, Bitcoin mining and mining on other networks can be cost prohibitive based on the volatility of the market, the energy consumption, and the cost to maintain the technological hardware to access the blockchain network.
So I'm not going home this afternoon and firing up my laptop and starting to mine, right? You need more sophisticated hardware than the average person has in their household.
Absolutely, but interestingly, I read a statistic recently that 25% of mining activities occurs on college campuses, and these college students who are entrepreneurial are hooking up their mining equipment to the dorm room electricity outlet, and the college is footing the bill for those types of electrical consumption costs, which is pretty interesting.
Can you talk a little bit about how blockchain can be useful for business owners? What does it mean to the business community to have this tool?
Well, that's a great question, and I think there are a lot of uses for business owners, particularly with the Ethereum network. So the Ethereum network is a little bit different than the Bitcoin blockchain network, and it's able to process more transactions more efficiently. And the architecture of the Ethereum network lends itself to continual adjustments to increase network functionality and efficiency. And the rules of the underlying code are also a little bit different and fosters constant evolution, as well as being able to be used for purposes beyond the transfer and storage of virtual currency. It also offers a lot more utilitarian purposes, and it is a platform for smart contracts to be built on and maintained and effectuated.
I think a good example of where blockchain can be very useful through the use of smart contracts is anytime you have a deal where a third party is used to verify and validate the transaction. Take, for example, real estate transactions, where you have title insurance, you have a title agent who is acting as an intermediary between the buyer and the seller, verifying that what is being bought is also what is being sold. It's my understanding that the blockchain smart contracts can help eliminate the need for some of that third-party verification.
Absolutely, and Sweden is actually spearheading a huge movement to adopting blockchain technology to maintain and record real property transactions. They are pioneering the way in this area for exactly what you said, and for that purpose, to be able to have a more efficient way to transfer and verify ownership of real property.
So, as a trusted estates attorney, why should I be paying attention to blockchain?
I think there are many reasons attorneys in general, not just estates and trust attorneys, need to pay attention to blockchain. I mean, one is to adhere to the professional rules of ethical conduct, required of attorneys to be kept abreast of technological developments. And blockchain technology is going to have far-reaching impacts that will ultimately interact and interface with many different parts of someone's life and, of course, their business. So the blockchain network can be used to record and maintain and manage records and data in real time. And estate planning documents could ultimately be put on a blockchain network. There are thoughts and theories that estate administration could be utilized more efficiently by a blockchain network. Whether documents are signed in ink or in some type of electronic digital form, is a whole other question. And, we did just complete a 3-part series on digital wills. But I think digital wills and blockchain technology are in the future going to be hand in glove together in reshaping and redefining the estate planning and estate administration process that we know today.
So as an estates attorney, I may have clients who are utilizing blockchain technology or storing information in a blockchain, whether it's a cryptocurrency stored in a blockchain or just data.
Absolutely. And practitioners need to be aware of that. They need to know how to access that. They need to know how to request that type of information and data in discovery proceedings. There are other more advanced types of smart contracts called decentralized autonomous organizations, which it could be a business that is put on a blockchain and completely coded so that it runs almost automatically. We will definitely be diving into DAOs in future episodes and the possibilities and capabilities of that type of technology.
What are some of the pros and cons of blockchain technology?
One of the principal tenets of blockchain from a public network standpoint is decentralization. It eliminates many barriers to entry that individuals or companies with unfavorable credit or no banking history could face, and it levels the playing field for a lot of different individuals. It also provides for the ability to eliminate a lot of administrative work for various employees or companies, and has the capability of simplifying and finding data and information when needed, especially with food supply chain networks or international shipping outlets. The ability to record, maintain, and manage records in real time amongst a large group of people can be invaluable for business transactions and reducing costs over time. The World Economic Forum projects that minimizing trade barriers with international blockchain supply chains will boost trade and stimulate the world economy by 15%. One of the other hallmarks of public blockchain technology is that it removes the issue of trust, since you have cryptographic proof of transaction and there's no need for third parties to facilitate the transactions, and they're permanent. They're always going to be contained on the ledger, which can be ideal for real property transactions, medical records, and storing company data and information. Ultimately, blockchain networks should have increased transaction times and reduced fees, and will eliminate a lot of third parties that are necessary to conduct business as we know it today. I am a cautious blockchain enthusiast. I see the underlying value in various types of blockchain networks across many industries, but there's still many hurdles to overcome before there can be mass adoption. So some of the hurdles are scalability issues. It takes too long right now to process transactions on a Bitcoin blockchain network, whereas Visa can handle thousands of transactions per second. The Bitcoin chain is markedly behind that. There's also environmental issues and miners' consumption of energy. It's not fully known how much energy is being consumed by miners because there is no centralized database recording this information, so it is speculative. But that is a concern that needs to be addressed, as well as the inconsistency of laws in many jurisdictions within the United States and then in other countries. Shout out to Caitlin Long, who has been spearheading the blockchain movement in Wyoming, and she's one of the co-founders of the Wyoming's Blockchain Coalition, and was instrumental with her colleagues in helping pass 13 different laws in Wyoming, which is very progressive for the blockchain community. And the intent for them is to have Wyoming as a hub to attract startups and pave the way in establishing property rights and custodial guidelines for digital assets of all types. Interestingly enough, the Uniform Law Commission, as a response to the Wyoming blockchain legislation, has issued a statement to encourage other states to refrain from proposing blockchain bills until it revises its supplemental act to incorporate different opinions and perspectives to help develop the Uniform Law Commission's model legislation. We also, which we didn't really talk about, are the nefarious activities that are occurring on blockchains. Now, the technology is not inherently criminal, but it can be utilized right now to facilitate criminal activity, and it can be easy for actors to remain anonymous and evade laws and various jurisdictions and governments. Right now, blockchain networks, don't require KYC compliance or AML compliance, which lead to criminal activities. Companies who want to utilize blockchain technology also need to be aware of compliance with the European General Data Protection Regulations and how that restricts information about EU citizens and how that information can be used. Even if a company is not operating in the EU, if they have clients who are EU citizens, they're going to be subject to the GDPR rules. And then, of course, there's the uncertainty around the technology, novel coding issues that can develop, issues at an architectural level, and the theory is that blockchain is trustless, but there can be tech issues that reduce that trust. There can be issues at a very rudimentary level of wrong inputting of key codes, storing and misplacing keys, and of course hacks. Now, in general, hacks are not hacks on the underlying blockchain network. They're hacks against an exchange or against a company that's supporting that network, but it can have massive consequences. And I think one of the biggest hurdles to mass adoption is that it's not user-friendly. And you need to have a user-friendly, comfortable interface for mass adoption. dApps, which are decentralized applications that are running on blockchain technology, need to create a comfortable experience and a familiar experience for users so they aren't even aware that the underlying technology that's supporting the dApp is on a blockchain network.
Well, thank you, Jen, for giving us that explanation of blockchain technology. Please join us for our next episode when we are going to be interviewing an expert in blockchain technology. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Digital Planning Podcast, the podcast designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating or review at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.